Thank you so much for joining us on Let the Healing Begin podcast. I'm your host, Asia, and today we have Dr. Eddie O'Connor on with us. How are you doing?
I am good. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's a pleasure for you making time.
Yeah, well, I really can't wait to contribute and help people on their journeys. Like that's what we do, right?
I appreciate that. So let's start with where you're from.
Yeah, I am from the Bronx, Bronx, New York City. Born and raised to some. My father was an immigrant from Ireland, and so we grew up kind of poor in the Bronx, but that's really where my roots are, and really enjoyed my time there.
So, like growing up, with your father being an immigrant from Ireland, did you guys like keep up with a lot of the customs and traditions?
Yes and no. So he was all about Ireland, and he was a very hard worker, 80 hours a week for over 40 years to provide. He came over with just a fourth grade education, and really wanted to provide for his family. I had a younger brother and sister as well. So we grew up pretty poor. And so there wasn't a whole lot that he did outside of that, but anytime my dad was home, there'd be Irish music playing in the background. I know of the big St. Patrick's Day parade in New York City was something that we would do. I've got one of my favorite pictures of me as a baby, just kind of sitting there and like all wrapped up and just kind of like banging my feet. I remember marching in the parade with County Kerry, and he would always talk about the All Ireland finals and when Kerry would be in it. So there was, and then I've even named all my kids Irish names and stuff. So it kind of really stuck with me. But outside of that, I would say no. I mean, I have very Irish cousins with accents and everything that I didn't pick up on. So I don't know. I don't know where it dropped off. But so a strong identity, but not a ton of the culture carryover.
Now, with you being an adult now, like, do you still carry out some of those traditions?
You know, it's interesting. Like, I'm really, both my parents have passed, and it's so funny. Right after my dad died, I started to notice that I switched my eggs from scrambled to over easy. And I remember he had heart conditions, some health things, and I always used to nag him the whole time about, why are you always eating these eggs? And like, you got to take better care of yourself. And I think one of the traditions I carried over was those eggs. Like, there's just little things like that. Other things that my dad gave me was like affection. He was just a great hugger and very verbal about how much he loved the kids and myself. And so I think, rather than Irish traditions passing over and his work ethic, those are really things from my dad in particular that stay through. So I keep the Irish pride. O'Connor, you have to. Yeah. But it's much more about his character that stays with me.
Absolutely. I'm sorry about the loss of both of your parents. And generally, like, we hear about moms being more like nurturing and stuff like that. Like, if we have a listener, what would you say that did for you, like growing up, like, having a nurturing father?
Well, it really, I'm going to go a little deeper into it. Like, I was mad at my dad for working so much because as a kid, you don't know that you need money. You don't know, I'm just mad that he's not at my games and that, I don't see him for 3 days because he's working. And then he comes home and he just goes to sleep and I'm angry. And that's unfortunate because now I realize, oh my gosh, the man was living on 4 or 5 hours of sleep to provide. And, of course he couldn't, make it to my track meets because he was out working. So I could attend, take me out of the public schools and attend to Catholic, elementary school and high school with tuition. So I'd have clothes. Like, we didn't feel poor, even though we were. And that's because he did everything that he could. So his nurturing was different in the sense of my mom was also very nurturing. And I really wish they were alive today because now being an adult and just about becoming an empty nester, there's a lot that I need to thank them for that I just didn't see. But how my dad helped define sort of manhood and everything else different was that I was always very comfortable being verbally expressive and affectionate. And I love the affection I have with my kids and with my friends. Like, I'm a big hugger. And I see so many men in particular sometimes get uncomfortable with that. And I get such joy out of the physicality. And that's on the other side too. I don't know if I got this from my dad, but I love CrossFit and football and like hitting and stuff like that too. But it's just the whole sensual, touching nature. And I'm sure I got that from my dad. And it is such a blessing of love. And I know there's a lot of love languages, but maybe men don't really feel like that's the case. And I'm like, wow, like to give my best friend a hug and to feel the embrace of my oldest, my old sons now, they're adults. There's just nothing like it. And I know it meant something to him because I know when the anger that we had, I'll never forget this time, had him in my basement and it just been tense. I had to get over these things for a good decade trying to work through them. And I remember I just took him one time. He also liked to talk a lot. I mean, maybe you might notice that I picked that up from him too, as much as I like to deny it, but
You're
he would
fine.
just go. And I was like, Dad, just shh. And I just told him to be quiet. And I grabbed him and I hugged him. And I just wanted 30 seconds where he wouldn't say anything. And I could just communicate that way. And I felt him melt in my arms. And he got quiet. And for years after that, he kept talking about that one hug that I gave him in the basement and the communication that came across. So I know for a fact that that's something that came from the way he was wired. And to be able to give that back, because I needed that. I just needed to hold him. And it was just 30 seconds, but he talked about it for years.
And you know what? I love that. Excuse me, because like when I say I can relate so deeply and heavily with you, like it resonates so deeply with me. Like growing up, my mom was that way too. And there was also another side to her, but as far as like affection, like we got a lot of that growing up, you know. And also like growing up, it was always like she always had something to say, right? And it was like I didn't understand how deep it went until, you know, now I'm an adult. I'm sorry, now I'm an adult. And now, you know, now that she's not here, it's like, oh man, what would I give to hear, you know, some of that stuff she was saying. And a lot of times, like as you mentioned, like in society, it's not really talked about like for men to be, you know, hugged and, you know, to make like physical contact with one another, you know, but sometimes that's what we need. Sometimes, as you mentioned, like that communicates the things that we can't even go to speak, you know? So it's really awesome. Like you still have those memories and still have that. Because I've like even come across people that have never like been hugged, you know, as children, or never like their parents have never, you know, said, oh, I love you, or any of that, you know? And it makes a great difference when you are raised with love, you know?
Absolutely. It's a language that I, you know, in every relationship that I have, that I'm so comfortable to express and receive. And, you know, gosh, I couldn't imagine living in any other way. And I'm sure that has something to do with me, you know, contributing then becoming a psychologist and how else it came through. You know, these are things that I was just raised with. And so I think it enables me to bring that into my professional work too.
Absolutely. Now, I know you said you had siblings. Like, were your siblings, like, did they like that growing up, or how did everybody react differently to it?
I'm sure that everybody reacted different. Like, I think as the oldest, and, you know, like there's a lot of literature out there about, and I'm not all into it as much as the other psychology things, but, you know, there's something different about the oldest and the middle kid and the youngest, and all of that has some truth. So as the oldest, and then especially because we had challenges growing up and there were, you know, many things there, I took on a lot of responsibility and a lot of what his absence did to me, while I understand it now. But I also didn't, you know, I felt like I had to perform and I had to take care of my mom. And so I got a real strong achievement motivation, just to put it, like, to cut to the chase. I still felt like I had to prove, and they were very complimentary of me, but I kind of maybe misunderstood that. I know I was loved no matter what I did, but the fact that I was doing things and getting complimented created in me, well, I better keep it up. Not that I ever felt like I was at risk of losing their affection, but I've put that out into the world. And so I don't think my siblings, to answer your question, really, I think they have their own issues and they went through their own way. So I don't think that they picked it up the same. You know, they are unfortunately not very close to them. I wish I was. Like, I'm in Grand Rapids, one's in Arizona, one's in North Carolina. We all kind of went our separate ways and we've kind of lived lives separately. Would I say if they're affectionate or not? Probably not as much as I am. I don't know. It'd be hard to say. But it really isn't a conversation that we've had. But, you know, we're all different. And yeah, I guess I just bring it back and say I'm thankful for what my dad gave me.
I appreciate that. So like when you graduated from high school and stuff like that, what was your dream job to go into? Was it like initially psychology?
Yeah, another thing I got lucky with is I send all my kids off to college and nobody knowing what they want to do. How do you not know? Because, I think it was at least in high school, I was reading Freud for fun. And by the time I applied to college, I knew I wanted to major in psychology, and I never turned around. And all my friends, they were like switching majors and taking an extra year to figure it out. And I'm just like, no. And then like afterwards, what are you gonna do afterwards? Well, I got to go to grad school because like that's just what you do. So I had 10 years scripted and I just followed it.
Yeah.
So I know that that was different, but I just feel like God made me to do this. I feel like there's a big purpose in what I do. It's much more than a job. Like this is like there were people he wanted me to save. And my mission now is with athletes and performance anxiety. I feel like that's what he wants me to do. I don't know exactly what or where or how. Maybe it's through the Success Stories community that I'm recently building. But I just know that helping people with that performance anxiety is sort of the mission now. And it started way back, again, with that peak interest. I didn't know sports psychology was a thing, so maybe that was the confusion. I knew psychology in general. It wasn't until the last class I took in college, so that was late. I don't know if I was going to do depression or PTSD or sexual abuse or something. But then I was an athlete that had mental struggles and took this class, the last class, my senior year. So now my athletic career is essentially over. And I'm like, well, I could have used this. This would have been good 8 years ago, like struggling on the track in high school. But I remember I took that class and I was like, oh, this is the direction I want to go. And I haven't looked back.
And you know what? Sometimes, I'm not even gonna say sometimes, like all the time with God and the way that he works, he never, reveals the whole entire plan at once, right? He gives it to us step by step, and it's kind of like he gives us one step and it's like, are you going to be obedient and take the step that I just revealed to you? Not even knowing what's on the other side of your obedience, and like you said, he used what you had gone through, to lead you to what you're doing now, Let me ask you this. So at what point did it kind of like snap for you and where you felt like this was your purpose though?
Oh, it was right at the beginning. Like I would say that it was a major in college. But when I went to graduate school, I remember once in a while looking and being like, why do I have like no doubt? Like I remember here's the moment. If you want to know the moment that it happened. So I'm in graduate school in Chicago and I've got a studio apartment because again, remember I don't come from money, so I'm borrowing and I'm in this studio apartment and it's roach infested and things are going on and it's tough. And my friends, a lot of them had graduated and they're working in business and they live in Manhattan and they're sending me pictures of Club Med and the things that they're doing. And I was like happy for them, but I never really paid attention because this is where I was and this is what I had to do and I had to get my degree. And I'm hanging out with one of them somewhere in the middle of my graduate training. And they're like, man, Eddie, like you're really sacrificing. And my response was, what? Like, here I am in this apartment. I don't even have a couch. I just have cushions on the floor. And they're Club Med and they're telling me, they're like, well, you're sacrificing. You've given up so much to do this. And I just go, huh. I never thought of it that way. I was like, this is just what I have to do. And that was it. Like the cost, the loans, I never questioned any of it. I never got nervous about any of it. I was like, this is the only thing that I should do. And then as my career went on, like each thing that comes out is sort of like that as well. If I could cycle it back to what you had said is like, God doesn't tell you until the last second. So my son, similar to me, my oldest son, in 5th grade, I think said he wanted to be an architect. When we went in the first day to high school orientation, he sat down, plotted out 4 years of the courses he would take to put him in position, executed it for 4 years, went to the University of Michigan, majored in architecture, graduated with that degree, and is now going to become a pastor.
Wow.
And yeah, well, you didn't see that coming, right?
No.
Like, laid the whole thing out, but somewhere in Ann Arbor, God grabbed his heart, and he says that everything he's done and every place he's been and all the classes that he took helped him and is in trust. But my son is inspirational to me because that boy doesn't know what's coming next. But in daily prayer, hours in the Bible, and because of what he's doing, he said exactly what you had said. He's like, you know what? God told me that he could lay out the whole vision, but I wouldn't understand it. So just do what I tell you today and trust. And he's had ups and downs and it's been hard. Doesn't mean that it's easy, but he's had peace. And I've seen the insecurities that he goes through. But the trust in God and how, I mean, he's just at the very beginning. He just graduated 6 months ago, but he's taken step after step and he feels good about not knowing. And then when God reveals it, he takes action. Sometimes it's hard to just sit. So he passed that on to me. And that's kind of where I'm at with my career now too. Like I have these things that I want to do and I'm asking God, will you tell me? And I'm getting the same feeling, like just do what's in front of you. Take care of the podcast in front of you. Talk like God has somebody listening to this and I need to be here now. So let's you and I give our best. And then tomorrow we'll figure out what the big deal is. And so I thank you for bringing that up because I'm kind of back in that cycle again of, despite the decades of experience and helping all these people, I mean, we might get into other details of it, but look, I ruined my life. Like, so I don't want to be in charge of the rest of it. I'm giving it back to God and saying, you take over from here. You take the wheel. Let me finish strong.
Ooh, that's some good stuff. And you know what? God is so dynamic. Like sometimes, like, you know, when he's calling us to one thing, like that might not just be it, right? Like how you said your son went to school for architecture and now he's a pastor. Like you'd be surprised how God is going to tie that in together, or how God is going to tie both of you in together. You know, you never know. That's so powerful. Oh my gosh.
Bring myself back to the story of David, because what resonates with me is like, how happy do you think he was as a shepherd? Like for however many years, that dirty job that there's, you know, tons of them, not special, slinging stones with his, you know,
Yes.
doing whatever, not realizing that God was having him practice for years for that one moment when Goliath would show up.
I know that's right. Ooh. And you know what? It just is, a lot of it is God wanting us to humble ourselves, you know, through the process and just trust him and, you know, take those blind steps of obedience. Because all of it is like preparing us, you know. He's bringing this back into my remembrance right now that in the Bible where it says you'll reap a reward if you faint not, you know. And so it's, a lot of it is just like God wants to know that we have humble hearts, that we will you know, like humble ourselves and go through the process. Let me ask you this. Let's say we do have a listener that is just that know they want to, you know, want to go somewhere, or maybe God has shown them a glimpse, you know, because sometimes God will show us a glimpse of the glory that lies ahead, but we won't know, you know, the in between of what it is or how we're going to get there. And sometimes, like you said, the process can be really uneasy, and it can be uncomfortable, and it can be all of the above. What would you say to the listener that's having a hard time to just come to terms with the process that they're having to go through?
Yeah, this is a great question. And I'm going to mix psychology and God, because quick tangent, then I'll answer your question. When I came to God a number of years ago, so I was baptized young Catholic and went through all of that. And then things happened in life and came back and, you know, spent 5 years of not getting baptized again. Like I couldn't accept God's grace. So there's a lot of learning that I had to do. And then ultimately started to find, like, once I found God, I was like, wait a minute, like all this psychology and performance excellence stuff, like, what am I doing? I felt like I couldn't do this. I was like, do I need to become a pastor? Because God is everything. I finally realized at 40 something, like God is everything. And I like all of this, be excellent and drive yourself and push. Like you talked about humble. That's not what I was. That's not what I was preaching. I was like, you need to take care of stuff on your own. So submission was not my thing. So how do you do both? Jesus said, in this life you will suffer. So it started there. Like anytime I didn't want to suffer, I had to understand that that was, of course, healthy and normal. And at the same time, that may not be God answering my prayers, because he already told me that suffering was part of it. Step 2 came to be like, well, why? Why do we have all this pain? And I still don't have the answer. Sorry, listeners. But what I've come to terms with is our almighty God could save the world any way that he wanted. And he chose death and suffering on a cross as the way to save us. So I don't understand why there's pain in this world, but I understand that there's something divine about it. And the third part then becomes, and then I have to trust, because I probably can't ever, even if God were to explain it to me, I probably wouldn't understand it. In fact, I'm sure I wouldn't. Like my brain is so much smaller. And we often say that and we humble ourselves about the difference between us and God.
Mm-hmm.
But to really understand that means, in the same way that when my kids are 5 and I'm telling them not to do things and they scream and they cry and they fight because they know what they want, they don't know because I'm older, and it's my job that no matter how upset they are, to have them go through that pain of not playing with electricity, of not eating candy 24/7. I'm screaming and I'm not giving them what they want. Yes,
I go through this every day.
Yeah. And so as adults, when we want these things, we want that relationship, that man or woman, that job, we want that experience. And if God doesn't give us what we want, I have to just humble myself and defer and say, I do believe that he is all good. I do believe that he is all knowing. I do believe that I have a role to play in this, and that role is not for me to do it. He is not my Santa Claus. He is not here to give me what I want. So let me continue to pray for his will in a daily basis. I'll make the requests. And sometimes he does show up and give me some of the fun stuff or some of the big things. Sometimes he does it in ways that I wouldn't have expected. He often does it in ways that are even better than I could have imagined. And all of them suck in the way that we go through, excuse the language, but like all of them are just like, I don't mean to minimize. That doesn't mean that the pain of the process, doesn't go away. Again, you want more stories I can tell you, but I have got tons of life experiences in there where I'm like, God, like these darkest moments, that if those darkest moments didn't have, I wouldn't be able to get the reward that he had outside of that. So I don't know why or how, but for whatever reason, this pain that we go through in life has a divine purpose.
You know what? And I'm going to go ahead real quick and read this scripture in Romans where it speaks about perseverance. It says, not only that we rejoice in our sufferings, knowing that suffering produces endurance, and endurance produces character, and character produces hope, and hope does not put us to shame because God's love has poured into our hearts through the Holy Spirit who has been given to us. Romans 5, verse 3-5. And you know what? You said something so profound, like, I look back over to some of the things that I've gone through, and I'm going to use myself for an example, like with this last season that God just had me in earlier this year, actually closing out of last year and going into this year, like God had me in a homeless shelter, and I knew that he wanted me to be in that space. He made it clear as day from the moment I walked in there. So I never questioned why, And so I just went through the process, and I would tell God, and this is the thing that a lot of people don't know, because a lot of people have this image of God, he's this big, mean God, and I mean, he is just, but he's not a big, mean God. He wants us to express ourselves. So like during my process and during that season and in that transition period, I expressed a lot of how I felt, to God, like, God, this hurts. This is really uncomfortable. I don't like this, I try to keep that to a minimum, but it was just, through any other season, it would be some days where it just felt unbearable, and on those days I would express that to God, and he never shamed me or became, angry with me in that process, or letting him know how I felt, and walking out of that season, like he opened up a door and I'm now, housed and home. And that situation was a but God moment, but in that, like, I had no idea that my season in that was prepping me for the season that I'm in now. Like, he literally blessed me with a job that is like advocacy work for the homeless, and I didn't know going through that process that I was being prepared and being primed for that. I had no idea, and I spent 8 months. This is another way that I knew it was God. Prior to me going to that shelter, right, God led me to the store one day, and I'm like, okay, so I walk in the store. I'm like, God, why do you got me here? I know it's somebody that you have me here for. So he led me to pray for a young lady and witness to her. And she opened up and started telling me how she was homeless and things like that. And the day I walked in the homeless shelter, this same lady was my roommate there.
Oh, wow.
In that moment, I'm like, this is you, God. You have me here for some reason, And when I walked out of that shelter, it was exactly 8 months and 7 days. Wow. Exactly 8 months and 7 days, And even a couple months before I left out of the shelter, God was showing me a set of like a number. And I kept asking, I said, God, what is this number that you keep showing me? What is this number that you keep I mean, for like 2 or 3 months. And when the door opened for me to move, do you not know it was the first two numbers to my address that God was blessing me with?
87.
Nope, 27.
Okay.
27. And I kept seeing it everywhere. I'm like, God, what are you showing me? And sure enough, but I said that all that to say, like, we just have to persevere. We have to persevere no matter the situation and the circumstance, because like the ministry and the people that we're called to, we have to go through the things to be able to witness, and be more effective in the kingdom. How can I go witness to this person and I've never experienced how can I say, oh, it's going to be okay if I've never walked through that same thing,
Yeah. The challenge I often have with that though is like, oh God, like why that job? Why do you want me to do this? Like, can't I, be LeBron James? I like his job. And the answer I've gotten is like, well, like LeBron James already got that job.
You're right.
And then the second thing is also too, and I always fought against this, is that like, this is just temporary. Like, it's a long time to be here, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years.
Yeah.
But when it starts to get overwhelming or when it's in a bad season, I just remind myself that I use this image. Like when I do something that God would approve of in the distress, I imagine I've got a little coffer in the corner, and I just mentally throw a coin in it for storing up my treasures in heaven. And that's what kind of gets me go through, because if I'm generous to the person that I'm angry with, if I forgive the person who I just don't want to forgive, if I, like have that issue and I don't act out on it, I'm like, God's seeing me. And even if it hurts here, even if I don't get what I want here, even if I'm hurt here, I'm filling up that coffer, because he promises, like, it's not only compliance, and he loves obedience. Again, this is not to mix up for anybody out there. This doesn't mean this is how we get saved. That's a gift. But there are rewards. I mean, I'll take the poorest house in heaven, right? Like that I'm sure that's beyond belief. But I don't know if I'm correct or not, but I'm also saying like, hey, well, gosh, like God, if there's really a bigger life than outside of here, if I want to do a good job here, I want to do a great job up there for the rest of my life. So if I've got to earn it, let me put those blessings in. And sometimes that's the hardest part. Like when I'm really afraid, when I want to switch over from my sinful behavior to one that God would approve of, when he's moving my heart in a particular direction, and I'm scared to do it. As you had said, those people who are listening and they're like, I just don't like where I'm at, I want to get out of it. And it's like, well, we do those principles of giving up our anxiety, casting it on him, and by actively doing that and figuring out what that means for you, God's promised that he'll reward us for it. And so we're not doing it for nothing, and we're not doing it out of compliance or because we have to. It's because we have no idea the blessings that are coming when we live in his word and in his will.
Oh, that's so good. And you know what? I've been feeling like, because this life is just a moment, right? And it is going to come a time where we all have to stand before God. When we pass away from this flesh, it's no in between. We don't float around earth, around people that are still living. And I'm not saying anything bad about anybody who may believe that, but it all comes down to the factual fact. We all have to see heaven or hell, right? And so even when it comes to like being nice to the person that I don't want to be nice to, I'm like, I want to treat people right. One of the first commandments that God said was to love, God. And then secondly, love thy neighbor, and when it's my turn to stand before God, I want to have some valid answers. I don't want to come up there with a shrug of the shoulders, or I don't know. That's God. I don't think God's going to want to hear that,
Oh, you are so right. I mean, and everything else comes in like such a far third place. It's like, love God, love others. And if you really, when you see the stories of the Bible there, he's like, look, if you've come in with me with sacrifices and you at the altar and you fighting with somebody, drop the sacrifice and go. I don't want the sacrifices and the worship more than I want you to fix that relationship. And when we look at our world today and all the conflict and lying and this and that we have, now again, let me remind everybody, I am not a pastor, despite how well my son is doing. He's like, like he's getting there. Like, I'm a psychologist. So this is just personal faith and what I understand in my journey. But I think that if God is love and the Holy Trinity, I've tried to figure out what that's all about. Isn't the Trinity just like the perfect relationship, like a true 3 in 1? So if we're made in the image of God, we can't actually be godly without other people, because God is a relationship. The most beautiful, loving, intimate, safe relationship. And he wants his will to go out there, and he is love. You can't love somebody without there being another somebody. So I think that message, I don't think we're even scratching the surface of the potential of what he wants for us and what heaven will be like. So it's wonderful to kind of hear your reaching out into other people, your service here in the podcast. I hope that's where I say, like, I don't have a job, but my work as a psychologist and in the Success Stories community, it's like, it's God's purpose because it's helping others. Yeah.
I love that. Now, let's say we have a listener, because there's a lot of another stigma that goes around about God too. And I thought this as well. That people oftentimes, like, people feel like they can't approach God, right, if they're not living right, and that's air quotes around that, because number one, like, who makes the rules? Who's to say, what ways that, God has laid the laws, which are the 10 commandments, and ways that we're supposed to be conducting ourselves. But, a lot of this religious talk, can scare people away from God. What would you say to the listener that feels like they might be inadequate to approach God or to approach the throne of God, or,
It's exactly the opposite. Jesus himself said that, the well people don't need to see the doctor, right? Like, you have to be sick to go. He says that he's come to save those who are lost. It's over and over again. First of all, we all aren't good enough. So let's just start there. Like, if we were, we wouldn't need a savior, and he died on the cross for nothing. So, like, when I was growing up, there were many years when I was a kid that I thought I didn't sin. And it's because I didn't do anything terrible. I was like an average good person. But once I found out what sin meant was missing the mark, it's like not being perfect. Then I was like, oh. And then Jesus clarified, if you so much as like have an angry thought, that's a sin. And it doesn't mean to shame us, but it's just, again, to put the comparison to what God is. So first and foremost, of course you're not good enough. We all aren't. So let's not be comparing. And please, if you're finding a church that's actually giving that message, then I would say don't go to that church then, because we all know that some of the churches, and even back in, Paul was writing to all those churches about they lose their way. But the gospel says that all he wants is for you to come to him. And you can come to him with anything. Like, I'm reading Psalms right now, and what's great about Psalms is, like, sometimes it's praise, and sometimes it's like fear, and sometimes it's just like, man, God, why are you doing this? Like, don't leave me alone. Like, and you can read Lamentations and other things. Like every emotion is in the Bible. Like, God can handle your attitude.
Yeah, that's true.
What he wants is for you to bring the attitude, because then you're bringing it to him.
Yeah.
So what hurts God more than anything is you going off and doing it on your own, or to be shying away. And we use this metaphor with our kids too, right? Like, when your kid is upset, or if they made a mistake at school, or they got into trouble and they run away in their room and they're crying because they don't want mom or dad to see that, and they don't want to disappoint you. And that, as a parent, that broke my heart. It's like, no, you don't understand. But like, all that I want is you to come to me with everything. You don't have to do anything. It's relationship. Well, our Father in heaven is exactly the same. He knows we're going to mess it up. That's why he died 2,000 years ago. He knows we're going to mess it up. He just wants us to be in relationship and bring him along with us. And he's not going to force us. Mm-hmm. I've begged him to force himself on me too, but he won't, because that's not love. That's manipulation. We've been in those relationships too, and that doesn't work.
Yeah.
So for all of that, I hope you can hear this, that like, it doesn't matter what you've done. God's waiting. He's waiting with open arms. And it literally, when I say it doesn't matter what you've done, it doesn't matter what you've done.
Oh, that just blessed me. a lot of people, I'm not even gonna say a lot of people, but I mean, we all have been in a space of like feeling like, oh, I've done this, God can't forgive me. And it's like, God already knows. Like, and when you were just speaking a minute ago, he's bringing back, so he's been speaking to me about authenticity for like the last 2 or 3 months. Like, I mean, left and right, about just being like our authentic selves and just like to our core. It's nothing that you can surprise God with. He already knows who we are, what we like, what we dislike. Like he created us, where it says in the Bible, he's bringing something else to me. I knew you before I created you in your mother's womb. So he knows about our attitudes, about our, it's nothing that you can spring on God and God's like, oh my goodness, I didn't see that coming. He already knows all about us. He knows what we will do and what we won't do, but he just has been speaking to me about like authenticity, like just being true to who you are. And another thing he's speaking to me right now is like a lot of us have gone through the motions in our childhood and just along the way, so sometimes like we don't know who our true authentic selves are, because maybe we've been hurt so much or we've been, we've kind of lost that along the way. And that's one of my prayers right now, because I'm like, God, over the years, like I lost all that, just ask him to like reveal it to you. He'll reveal your true core being to you, and just allow him like to let him remake that.
Let me ask you, if I could play psychologist, Christian psychologist for a moment. Well, what does that mean? Like, if you're expecting an answer of like, well, who am I? Like, I have so many clients that ask that question. And I've answered it over my years differently, but rather than suggesting that as a particular answer, I'm curious, what are you looking for in the answer? What if you were going to say, what's your authentic self? What kind of answer are you looking for?
You mean like when I ask God that?
Yeah, like whether it be yourself or my clients, like we're always asking for a reason. Like, well, I have to be my authentic self, and who is that, and who am I? It's interesting the way I hear people answer it, and sometimes I think it's a helpful way, and sometimes I don't know. I think it's a self-limiting way. So if I could play with you for a little bit here, like what would you say when you say who's your authentic self and what's being put on your heart? What's the answer that you're thinking or getting?
For me, honestly, the only thing that I can think of that comes to mind, because like I said, like I've just been through so much in my life. And so I don't think I've ever really developed a sense of who my true authentic self is. I mean, I don't think I've ever really got a feel for that, because I've just learned to like, I've had to be stronger, than, like I just have always had to be a strong person, So like in my teenage years, I didn't really get to enjoy teenage years or a whole lot of my childhood, or, like I was talking to God, like to think of what my dreams are. Like, I don't even have those, like I'm in a space of God, I want what you want for me. And he's passing me the ball back. Like, I want you to be your true authentic self. And I'm like, well, show me, because at this point, like, I don't know, but I do know that I am here to serve people. And I would say that's like one of the first layers of my true authentic self, because that's what feels the most fulfilling for me.
You nailed it. So let me jump in, if it's okay with you, and explain kind of what I meant by this. So in my work, what I find, going back to psychology, is that we put ourselves in these boxes, and they're very unhelpful. We use a lot of labels. Like, as you had said, for example, like you identify as a strong woman, and that's great and that's helpful. So as long as that works, keep using it. But so many of us out there is like, oh, I'm lazy, or I'm not a good person. I'm not good enough. When we think about our authentic selves, we kind of label good or bad, which is really ridiculous, because again, from God's view, and that's the view we want to keep taking, we're all righteous in his eyes, but diseased with sin. So that's another big thing, which is a tangent of sin is not me, but it's in me. There's a big difference there. But going back to the label of, like, if I were going to say I was a good person, does that mean that I've never done a bad thing? Well, of course not. If I say that I'm honest, and I like to believe that I am, does that mean I never told a lie? Well, no, that's not true. If I say that, well, I'm a liar, or I'm a criminal, or I'm a drug addict, Does that mean that you've never done drugs or you've never done any of these good things? I said, no, they're just overgeneralizations. And for most people, that's not helpful, even in a positive way, because you'll know these people too. Well, I'm awesome. I'm great. I'm an athlete. Well, I'm not always awesome. Now I'm really being arrogant, and now I'm treating people bad because I'm overconfident, and then that hurts. And well, I'm an athlete now, but what if I break my leg and now all of a sudden I've lost my identity because I put all my identity in some sport? These are things that we do. They are not who we are. These are experiences that we have in life. They are not who we are. And here's how you put it together beautifully. You had said, well, without saying it, but you basically said, I'm a daughter of God. I'm a son of God. I'm a child of God. That's who I am. That's all of it. That'll never be taken away. And everything else is what I do. And so you are now, I wouldn't say being defined by your purpose, because you're defined by your child of God. But now you have a purpose. Now, because you're so close to God, now you can take care of the poor, you can take care of your kids, you can be strong, you can be weak. And these are just things that you do, and this is what you do. But your identity is as a beloved daughter of God. Everything else is just kind of what we do with it. That's my take.
You know what? And God is something else, because he is. So you remember I told you that God had been speaking authenticity before me for months now, right? So let me tell you how deep this has gone with God, right? He's giving me pieces of this puzzle, slowly but surely. So he's been bringing the authenticity and authentic up before me, right? And so you remember how I told you, God had me go through that season of homelessness to deal with this job. No, well, not deal, but, step into this job. Well, first of all, part of my title with the job is authentic. The word is authentic. It's in there, And so when I first got hired in, I was speaking to one of my coworkers about this, because she's a believer too. And so God had me release a message at the end of November about authenticity and being authentic. And then he just started dropping revelation on me just in the middle of the night. The last part of the message that he gave, let me back up some. So a few days after I put the message out there, Merriam's dictionary released their word for 2023. Guess what the word was?
Authentic.
Yes. Then the second part of the message that he had me release was that not to allow people to put labels and stigmas on me, and just to be your authentic self. And so I just got a revelation of what you were saying. My number one identity, my true authentic self, is to be a child of God. That's my true authentic being. And the things that I've done are just, labels and stuff. It's just what I've done and not who I am.
Right. God would never define us according to these earthly properties.
I love that. This just blessed me.
Yay.
Thank you. So let me ask you this. So, what, over the years, now that you look back, what's one of the main things that psychology has taught you?
Oh, wow. What is the main thing that psychology has taught me? The biggest struggle, is Dr. Heal Thyself. And it's similar to the launching off point of what we've talked about. And it's a huge part of what we do in the Success Stories community, which is to really hold on to what we think and feel lightly. A couple high points. Our brain is designed as our survival mechanism to look out into the world and see danger. So with this negativity bias, we can't trust everything that we think. And we all know that, but then we don't practice holding on to it lightly. And what goes on in our brain because of all the cultural influences is very earthly. So when you start to compare that to scripture, this is partially why God says, be in my word every single day and over again, because they're two different messages. And our lives go according to, well, which one do we invest in and believe? So that's psychology. It's how am I programming my mind? And so knowing that there are so many, whether it be sinful or just cultural or protective, there's just a lot of reasons that we think the way that we think. And it doesn't mean that we're wrong, but the way I've been learning recently, and I teach my clients to interact, is it's not right or wrong. It's not should or shouldn't. It's not even positive or negative. It's, is it helpful or hurtful? Is what I'm thinking right now, is it moving me in the direction towards where I want to go? Or is it getting in the way? And then learn the skills, how to, what I call unhook. And that can be very difficult because I've got like these kids in my head from 5th grade that were teasing me about being unathletic and heavy and, this and that and the other thing, that I remember when my kids got to be in 5th grade, I remember looking at them and being like, I didn't say this to them, but in my head, I was like, why are your friends still up here dictating how I live my life? Why do I still feel like that insecure kid that, had to, be afraid of being bullied? And like, why is this still haunting me? Why do I still have these images from media that tell me, as I get older and I'm not as athletic as I used to be, that I don't measure up, even though when I was at my height, that still wasn't good enough, right? I don't have all that negative thinking, and the I'm not good enough hasn't gone away. But psychology has helped me in unison with God to say, I don't have to invest in it. I shouldn't believe it. And that doesn't mean that it'll go away. So for those that are listening, I wish I could take away those horrible memories and those visions and those images and those words that your dad said or that you never got from your teacher. I can't. But what I can say is, just because it happened doesn't mean that you have to invest in it or believe in it. And psychology says, how can we unhook? And the same thing with emotions. Like, we have all kinds of crazy emotions. And just even today, even just in this podcast, we've been serious, we've laughed, I've been a little embarrassed, been a little bit tense. Emotions come and go, but when we kind of say, well, I'm depressed, therefore I justify my actions, or I'm anxious, so I'm going to run away. We use these emotions to be the dictators in our life. This psychology has taught me to kind of say, no, I can't trust emotions either. We go through them, we respect them. But if I'm going to be all caught up in fighting how I think and feel, here's where the sports psychology comes in, then I can't free up my attention to play football or hit a golf ball, or for the everyday person not athletic, be present with my kids, invest in my job, pay attention to this podcast. I can't be present if I'm fighting my internal stuff. So psychology has taught me to accept that all this stuff is there, but what defines me, as you had said, is being a child of God, identifying my values as a result of that, and then taking committed action towards those values on a daily basis, because I can never achieve honesty or generosity or intimacy, but I can, and that's good. I'm glad I can never achieve it, because I never want to achieve it and stop. I can do it 100% today, and I can do it 100% tomorrow. So in a nutshell, that's what I would say that psychology has done. How do I hold on less to my internal psychological experiences? They don't define me, and only use them when they're helpful, but take committed action towards the things that really matter by being in the present moment.
You know what? And when you were just speaking, it was something that somebody said to me a moment ago, not a moment ago, but not long ago, when you were talking about some of the stuff that you went through being younger, and how that fired you up to, do what you're doing now. What they said was take the thing that tried to destroy you and make sure it doesn't, destroy anyone else, and that replayed in my mind when you were speaking. And then also too, it's really dangerous to stay in a place of emotion, especially just in life in general, but especially on this walk with God. Because some of these situations in these seasons that we have to go through, God will show us a vision of where he's taking us. It could be just a glimpse. Some of us he'll show more than others. But on this walk, it's easy to get carried away by emotion, right? And emotions, my emotions, they can't see, what God has shown me, So it's easy. It's so easily to get wrapped up in that. Even for those, for the people that are not walking with Christ, it's triggers that happen every day, but it's just a matter of self-control, self-discipline. Am I going to get carried away in this, Let me ask you this.
Before you do, let me challenge you a little bit on that, because Those are words that we use a lot: emotional control, discipline, and to a certain degree, yes. Again, you think about athletes, and if we want to get somewhere in life, there's discipline. I'm not going against it. However, I don't want to mix it up for your listeners. I don't know everybody's background, but I'm sure there are things that make you angry, and the solution is not about not being angry about it. It's about, how do you respond to that anger? Do you use it as energy to fuel you, or do you use it to destroy the person that hurt you? Yeah. There's nothing wrong with the anger. You probably have a lot to be angry about. I know for a fact everybody out there's got plenty of stuff to be anxious about. We live in a difficult world. Our future is not guaranteed. You are worried about things that you care the most about. All of your anxiety is justified. So when people tell you to don't worry about it, just be optimistic, or even if they say just trust in God, that doesn't mean it. There are lots of, as you said, you were one of them, homeless people out there, and just trusting doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. But is your anxiety warning you so that you can take empowerment and you can use it to be helpful, or is your anxiety then paralyzing you? So it's not about emotional control. And when you give into your emotions, I just ask you all to listen to this sentence and hold this close to you. Is it helping me or hurting me? Is it helping me move towards where I want to go or away? And rather than distract yourself by making yourself feel better, like, prioritize your feelings less. Not that they're not important, but just because we can't control them. That's the control word that scares me. But if I'm anxious, if I'm scared, if I'm upset, even if I'm sad, there are times to be that. Like after my parents' funerals, I cried and I took days off. And nobody said well, actually I did. I had an uncle that says they're in a better place. And I was like, was that supposed to help me? But you take the time, and then through that love, and, connect to other family members, right? Because there's always a vision. There's always some place to go that it can be helpful. It doesn't always mean productive. Sometimes there are times where you just care for yourself. Sometimes there are times, I don't know if you've done it. Like I got on my knees and I've cried reading Lamentations front to back. That brought me closer to God. Like, use any emotion that you have and see how can it move me in the right direction. That's the thing that you want to keep in front of you. It's not about feeling better. It's not about controlling your emotions. It's about helping us become, if you want to use the word disciplined, I like to say more intentional about living the life that we want to live according to our values, which, at least between you and me, is based on God's will.
You know what? And I love that. Because that's another thing, like, about when we, go into this emotional space, or even when we go through stuff, like, it's not the fact that we feel these emotions, because, that's just like what we do as humans, that's just, we have that capability, and that's a blessing that God has given us. I call those our features, So it's not the fact that you feel these different emotions. It's just, like you said, what you do with those emotions. Are you going to get stuck there, or are you going to use that to fire you up? And honestly, like, God has had to show me how to take those emotions and use them, like, to put passion forth, with fighting back. Like, I'm not going to stay stuck here, because is it going to help me or is it going to hurt me? The longer I stay here, the more I'm delaying my initial process, So I'm going to be crying, but I'm going to keep going and keep moving while I'm crying,
That's it exactly. Yeah. You bring the emotions, you bring the discomfort, you bring the fear, you bring it all along with you, and you take those committed actions according to your purpose. And sometimes it's wonderful and it's exciting. Sometimes we're confident and we're bold, and sometimes we're terrified and we're upset and we're angry. And there's room for all of that in that intentional process. You had a question for me.
And I got another one now. So, like, in society, oftentimes, like, anger is often frowned upon, right? Because a lot of us aren't taught that anger is another emotion, just like sadness, happiness. What would you say to a person that's feeling this anger and is feeling like shame for the anger that they're feeling?
Yeah, so shame is one of those emotions that I don't think God intended. Like, so we know that the basic human emotions are happy, sad, mad, and scared. So if you're having any of those four, you're going to have those. We can't get rid of those. They are often beneficial. Shame is different than guilt. I even think we should feel guilty. You do something wrong, you should feel guilty. Guilty means I did something bad, I regret it. It's a behavior. Shame is I am bad. And what I say is that that's a sinful emotion, because that's not what God says. That's not what God says. This is, again, it's coming back, but in this Christian retreat I did about a year and a half ago, like, it just hit me. because I confused my sin without even consciously knowing it. I just felt like I was bad. And when I heard that verse, that sin is in me, but it's not me, all of a sudden I started to see sin as like cancer. I'm diabetic and I don't identify with diabetes. Diabetes isn't who I am. I'm like, darn it, my pancreas fell apart and now I've got diabetes. It wasn't God's plan. It wasn't something of who I am. It's something I have to live with every single day, and I have to take it into consideration. I have to interact with it all the time. I have to bring it along with me. But I'm a child of God. I'm not diabetic. Shame, though, twists that message and says, there's something wrong with me in a deep way, in a way that God hasn't touched. And so if you're saying that now you're shameful and you're bad because you have this normal human emotion of anger, and again, Jesus flipped the tables in the temple. There's such a thing as righteous anger. And he's perfect. So there's a time and a place. There's a time and a place. So if you continue to interact with it, one I would just say is, I don't know how to say this softly, but please let it go. Don't have shame for your anger. There's so much in this world for us to be angry about. I don't know your personal story as you're listening, but I'm going to guess that if you told it to me, if we were sitting in a room together, I'd be like, man, I'd be angry too. I understand your anger. You were hurt, you were wronged, you were lied to, you didn't get what you wanted. Why wouldn't you be angry? And once you can create that space and maybe show yourself some compassion for having it, that's been very healing for myself. Once I started to create room, I started to hint at some things, but I had divorce and it was messy and lots of things, in the aftermath of that. And everybody tell me, get over this and do this and forgive that. But once I remember this one time I sat and I was really upset. And I said, you know what, Eddie, you have every right to be as angry as you are and to want to fire back this email and be defensive and protect yourself for X, Y, and Z reasons. What was amazing is that when I showed myself compassion, and I was the only person in my life doing it, and said, you have every right to be angry and to want to fight this person. You have every right to want to protect yourself and not get hurt again, or to get revenge. That all makes sense. And as soon as I gave that to myself, and this was like a half hour going back and forth, what opened up was this space. And then my kids came into my head and said, but what do you want to do for them? I was so in the fighting and the anger and then trying not to be angry because I didn't want to be angry and it was ruining things, but I couldn't stop defending. And I wanted to take care of my kids, and I was justified because that's why my anger was to take care of them and to do the right thing and not let the bad thing happen again. But I was blind in that anger. And once I told myself it was okay to be angry and had every freaking right to be angry, it's like a veil got lifted, a mask came off, the blinders rather came off. And I saw my kids and I said, but what would be the best thing for them? And I took a step that I didn't want to take, that I still wasn't happy about. But because I really valued being a good dad and because I love my kids, I said, that's really what's best for them. And so I took the hit with peace. And I never would have seen that if I didn't give myself compassion for being angry, if I didn't give myself permission to be angry. So please drop that struggle with whatever that emotion is that you're feeling, that you're struggling with. I bet you have a good reason to feel it. Doesn't mean that it's true. Again, if you're telling yourself that you're terrible and horrible, those aren't emotions. That's a lot of the self-talk. But pain, fear, anxiety, sadness, even shame. Again, I'll challenge the shame because you're probably telling yourself something about your quality. But guilt, heck, if I didn't have guilt, I'd keep doing the bad stuff. So the guilt is helpful. Yeah. Anyway, I could go off on more tangents, but I hope that answers your question.
That was good. So let me ask you this. I'm going to take it back to when you got out of college, right? We're going to shift gears. So when you got out of college and you decided to, well, what was your first stop? Going into psychology, what was your first stop after college?
I wasn't sure. I didn't get in where I wanted to go, and it's because I didn't know what direction I wanted to go. So that was humbling. I was like, okay, great. So I went back to my parents. I worked in a dual diagnosed hospital with adolescents who had mental health issues, hospitalized, and substance use, and just kind of figured it out. And that's when I kind of knew, because I had just taken the sports psychology class, that I was like, oh, well, now I know what I want to do. So I saved up some money for 2 years and then applied to a whole different set of graduate schools that would have both sports psychology, but then allow me to continue with the clinical work and specialize in the things that athletes suffer from the most. So when I went back to graduate school, what I specialized in was things like injury and rehabilitation. I did some stuff with disordered eating. I did some stuff with substance use, did a lot with depression and anxiety, because as I said, the performance anxiety and things like that is what I wanted to help athletes with. So I just looked at what athletes would suffer from the most. And then, long story short, as I went through my career and stuff, I just kind of keep diving into that with that purpose of, well, what are the issues that this group tends to suffer with? And speaking of shame, there's a lot of that, and people who feel like they have to earn their worth. A lot of perfectionism, a lot of I can't make mistakes, a lot of being hard on ourselves, and that type of pressure to always have to win affection or love or our worth. Earning our worth is a big thing with my clients. It's a never-ending treadmill, and I know because I was on it, and hence I had a midlife crisis. Which we could talk for a whole weekend about all this stuff, but there's a lot of depth into this. But I help people now with the stuff that I thought at first I was going into, that I was invulnerable to, and turned out, oh my God, I'm living all of these things. And so anyway, so that's the path as it went through.
And you know what? God has been speaking to me too about like perfectionism, like we're not expected to be perfect. A lot of times, like it could be us walking out these assignments he's given us, it could be just anything in our everyday lives, like anything, like when I started this platform, God was like, I want you to start a podcast. And I'm like, what? You want me to do what? And so I would record, and sometimes I would listen to it, and oh my God, this is just not up to my liking yet. And he's like, this does not have to be perfect. Just get it out there. That's another aspect of the journey I'm going to show you along the way. Just take that first step, So like going,
Can I give you the biggest nugget for perfectionists? So you have perfectionists listening, because this is gold. So I want everybody to sit down and pause on this one. This is so helping perfectionists at the beginning. And if you're one here too, tell me this. When people tell you mistakes are okay, right? Because we all make mistakes and nobody's perfect. Does any of that help you?
I'm sorry, say it again. Say it again.
So like when I first started to help perfectionists, usually what people will say is mistakes are okay, nobody's perfect. As a perfectionist, when you hear that, what does that do to you when you hear that?
It doesn't do anything for me, really.
Right, exactly. In fact, I have found it's quite the opposite. When you tell me that nobody's perfect, I don't care. I have a different standard. When you tell me mistakes are okay, I don't believe you, because anytime I make a mistake, I get in trouble. Yeah. We get fired. We get red marks on our paper. The coach yells at us. So please stop coming to me with this cliche that mistakes are okay and everybody makes them. Like, don't step to a perfectionist with that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So let me speak for real to you out there. If you're a perfectionist, mistakes aren't okay. They're not. There are consequences. Yeah. And people are going to get hurt and upset. And that podcast that you did, the first one, I'm sure it's not as good as the one you're doing today. It wasn't good enough. You need to be better.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. If you really want to be a perfectionist, you don't have to like mistakes, but you do have to understand that they're a part of your process. You have to understand, and this is where we miss it, that when you make a mistake, stop and learn from it. Because our ego will usually be like, well, I'll just do better next time, or this isn't good enough, and let me focus on how bad this is and how I got to do better. And it's a whole bunch of blah, blah, blah ego yelling. But if you really want to be excellent, what you need to do is humble yourself, recognize where it isn't good enough. Not that you're not good enough. Remember, guilt and shame, this isn't about you as a person. It's about a behavior that you can develop and fix. What wasn't great about that first podcast? Let me go in, let me break it down, let me see where I can make an improvement. And then tomorrow I'll get 1% better. And then I'll make another mistake, and hopefully it's a different mistake. If you're making the same mistake over and over again, we'll have another conversation, but hopefully it's a different mistake because you've gotten better and you've learned. And if you, as a perfectionist, are dealing with your mistakes every single day and learning from them, then that's going to put you on a skyrocket pace to excellence. And you'll get as close to perfection as you possibly can. That's the difference. It's the relationship with your mistakes. And there is truth in every aspect of your life that will show you that there are millions of mistakes that you've made and you didn't learn from them. And that's the biggest mistake. I've asked so many of my clients, if you learned from every mistake, where would you be right now? They're like, I wouldn't be here. I'd be a lot further ahead. We don't take the time. It's a cliche. We know we have to learn from mistakes. And then we go on and we go right back to our thing about denying them or just demanding better. That demand doesn't do anything. It helps our ego. So I'm going to lean into it and say, you're right. Let's not keep appeasing people and do these cliches about how mistakes don't matter. They do. They're painful. They hurt. They're not good enough. You want that podcast to be better. I want the mistakes in my life to be a better father, a better partner, a better psychologist. So whatever mistakes I've made from today, I want to humble myself. I won't like them. I won't like the process. And I will go through it and fix them so that I'm a better man tomorrow. That's the magic.
I love that. So let me ask you this, like going into the psychology that you're in now, did you have did you have any inkling that you would step off into that prior to even taking any of the classes or anything? Or it was like, once you dug off into that class, it was like, okay, I've arrived. Like you felt so much peace, like that's what you wanted to do? Or how did that go for you?
Yeah, I would certainly say that for whatever reason, I felt like God is just in any area of my life, he's just said, this is what you're doing. And again, sometimes it switches because I didn't know. I knew it was psychology, but I had no idea. But, then I'm in this class and I'm like, I can't think about anything else. This is it. And then I didn't know how or what. And honestly, I'm like a huge Buffalo Bills fan here, right? Like I want to be on their sideline helping them win their first Super Bowl. And I'm praying for that, but that God hasn't answered that dream, right? And I don't know that he will. And if it does, then maybe it's at another time. But, I look back and I'm like, well, why not? Another interesting story. I presented to this at our national conference and I told a bunch of my colleagues and friends, it was called Business and Babies. It was about finding work-life balance. And I stood up there and I told them, I'm like, I'm jealous of you. I was like, because you're working with this NFL team and you're working in the Olympics and you're doing this. And I was like, I have been so upset because I've wanted the career you've had. I was like, at the same time, and I showed pictures of my kids. I was like, I've been home with them every day. And I know you didn't when you had to take 3 weeks and go off to Japan for the Olympics, or that you're sleeping basically in the baseball stadium because there's the season's that intense. And so I'm thankful for God that while I haven't been able to be on the sidelines of my beloved Bills, I know I couldn't have been present for my kids at the same time. So I wouldn't say that there's peace in that sense, but as far as when I look back and say, who are the people in front of me? I look at the clients that I had. I did a lot of work with chronic pain for a while. And I just had the sense that there were certain people that I were helping, a couple clients in particular, that were just like, God, did you make me a psychologist to help this woman specifically? Did you make me a psychologist to be in this city and to change the way chronic pain is being treated here? I didn't choose those things, but I had a peace about them. And that's kind of where I'm at here too. I didn't go out and say, what do I really want to do? I think I want to be on the sideline with the Bills, but what I know is that I am where God wants me to be. And if not on the daily, on the weekly, there is somebody or some conversation, including this podcast, where I'm in the opportunity to give what God wants me to do. And then it's like, okay, I'll keep asking for the Bills, but if it doesn't give it to me, I'll be okay, because I'm going to see that I'm where I need to be.
Absolutely. So what if we have some listeners wondering exactly what it is that you do? Can you give us more elaborative insight?
Yeah, well, if you've made it through this whole podcast, you've got a really good sample. This is what I do. I just do this over and over again. So I do one-on-one consulting with clients, athletic or not, but usually again in the flavors that we had said there. I'll do presentations and workshops with teams or universities, athletic departments, businesses. Really, the idea is, I like to say my mission is to overcome the obstacles to excellence. So I really do help people achieve their best version of themselves. Athletically, I work with musicians and stuff too. But even whether it be in health and personal goals, because I see psychology as different. I don't see it as pathology. Like I said, I want to normalize the obstacles that you're going through. And I sure as heck don't believe in positive thinking and confidence. I think it's great when you have it, but I tried my life. You said, I've tried to be positive and I can't. Like there's just too many negative things. It turns out, when I can be positive, it helps, but I help people learn that when you can't be positive, how do you unhook? Like that's the big skill that I teach. How do you unhook from those thoughts and feelings that are moving you in the direction away from where you want to go? And the biggest place that I like to do it is what I believe has been God's mission. Long story short, I was working at a hospital, COVID happened, a whole bunch of things, and my position was eliminated. And like the next week, there was this free workshop about memberships. I was like, okay, what's this? And I immediately had that same feeling that I had when I was reading Freud, when I went to graduate school. And I was like, this, God? And so I went and I did a 2-week training and I was like, this seems it. And I just threw myself into it. And it's been 2 years and it's growing. But I feel like God's telling me, I need you to send this message to scale. I need you to help a lot more than just the people one-on-one. And so the Success Stories community is an online community that I have where everything I do has been, it's in some different modules on like mindfulness or on improving sleep or on developing that willingness and that strength. We've got group team meetings once a month where we kind of all go in there and we share and we kind of journey together. But the idea is that it's a really cost-effective way to be able to get the training and the support that you need to overcome those obstacles in your life. And while a lot of athletes are in there and high performers, I'll be honest, I've got people from all ages, from teenage and college athletes to people in their 60s and 70s, having their 7th surgery and rehabbing and just getting back into life. Because we're all trying to be the best version of ourselves. It's just the context that's different. So it's a nice blessing that God has helped me take this performance excellence mantra and do it with elite athletes, and then create the Success Stories community where it's open to everybody. If you just have that sort of athletic mindset of wanting to be better, you're the perfect fit, and I'd be happy to help you inside.
I love that. I really love that. I do. I love that. What and so if people want to work with you, do you have a website? How can they find you, or how can they gain access to the Success Story group?
Yeah, by all means. So super easy, dreddieoconnor.com. You can get the spelling. I'm sure you'll print it out. And on that website, I've got some free resources for you. So you can get to my YouTube channel. It's got a mental toughness to 60 seconds video series, like 150, 170 videos. So you can kind of play around with that. It's got links for, one-on-one consulting if I can help you personally. And then if you click the membership link, it'll have all the details about the Success Stories community. And there's a link right there to join. And when you come in, you get started right away, get instant access. And I want to, I take feedback really well. So the membership has evolved over time. So when you get in, if you can't find what you want, although it's really easy to do so, but if you have any feedback or questions that you want, like I'm in touch with everybody who's in the membership, so let me know and we'll help sculpt it and point you in the right direction. In fact, when you join, I'll give you a free 20-minute one-on-one orientation, just to be sure that you get started off correctly and, invest in your success.
I love that. I love that. I love this. I love this. I got one more question for you. Just downloaded into me. So it was something that you mentioned a moment ago about before I say this, I really love how real and authentic you are and organic, with just the way that you are. And it was something that you said a moment ago about positive thinking and positive mindset, how that doesn't work or something, like in that nature that you said. Can you elaborate? Because a lot of times, like we hear a lot about positive thinking and positive mindsets. Like that's the social, the societal norm, So to hear something, some people are, because I was even like, huh? you know?
Yeah, well, see, that's all right. You're gonna get me all agitated again, but see, this is what I believe. Like God has like sent me into this because what frustrates me with my field is that, and all the stuff that we have in the media is that it's telling people to do things wrong, and it's frustrating us. Like I went to graduate school and I argued with my professors about this positive self-talk. I'm like, are you kidding me? Because don't you think I've been trying to be positive? Doesn't everybody already know? You don't need to go pay a psychologist a whole bunch of money to tell them that you need to be more positive. Like, I went to school for a long time. I better come out with something better than that.
Yeah.
And then when I find out that biologically it's impossible and that you're actually going against your very nature, because if you were positive all the time, that'd be unhealthy. We call that mania, and people get medicated for that. It's like, what is this intolerance of what it means to be human? It's just too much pressure for human beings. And then we go out and we start pathologizing people. We're talking about all these people have anxiety. Have you been in this world? This is normal. So I get agitated. I don't like it when we have all these rules that we can only live in 25% of what it means to be human. I told you there are 4 human emotions: happy, sad, mad, and scared. 3 of them are negative. 3 of them are unpleasant. And if our message to the world, to our kids, to our partners, if the expectation is that no matter what's going on in your life, that you have to put on a happy face, that's not authentic. That's not genuine. That's not real. And that creates more problems.
It does.
So it's funny that you ask about that, because if you do go to my website, you'll get a pop-up and it offers free training. And it is exactly that. The video is called What to Do When Positive Thinking Doesn't Work. And listeners, I swear this was not scripted. She didn't even know this. I didn't even mention this. But it's a wonderful question, because if you go to the website, you just put in your email and you'll get about a good 20, 30-minute training on this, on elaborating on exactly what this means, why that's the case, and that's all free. So it's a wonderful introduction, but I've been saying it for years, and it is really a shift in the way that people are thinking. But if you have tried to be positive and you can't do it, I have a better way, and it is much more effective. I promise.
I really love that. I love that. I love that because it's so real, it's so real. We're not going to be happy every day all the time. That's just not how it works. We're human with human emotions. And like you mentioned, like the media, they want us to just be so robotic, in this world that we're in. And we're like, it's so much going on in the world, it's so much going on in the world. And it's okay, like to acknowledge how we feel, So I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I'd love to close it with maybe where we started. Like, let's circle it back. You're talking about authenticity, and I appreciate that comments about it. Like, one of my values is honesty and things too. And so as I'm like, my head is like saying, don't say this, people are going to be listening. Don't, you got to be perfect. Don't you remember? Like, so I'm like, okay, listening to all that. But I told you about hugging my dad, right? And what do we love about those hugs when we have somebody that we love and we're holding them? Or in your case, when you're authentic and you're yourself, and the person in front of you sees you and they don't run away, they actually move closer. When you're crying and you're upset, when, and somebody just lets us be in that emotion, and they don't say a word. Like, those are the most powerful things in my life. My dad and I were having so many difficulties, and I was so angry about so much, and he wasn't present, and but in that moment, in all his imperfections and all of mine, in that authentic embrace where we just let it all be there as it was without having to fix anything, was one of the best moments of his in my life. And that authenticity that you're talking about, when we can just be who we are in all of our brokenness and be seen and heard, we create this room for the anxiety, the sadness, the moments of weakness where I feel ashamed. And if I can be honest and genuine and authentic with another human being in front of me, that's where the connection is. And God sees us that way, and that's how he wants us to come to him too. So, a really nice tie together. There's no room for this fake, just be positive spin on it. Let's get back to what's really happening, because when you deal with reality, you can live life much better.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. I love that. My heart is so full. This is why I love doing this.
Well, you're blessing others. Thank you for the opportunity.
You know what? I'm sorry to everyone that's been on on the show before, Eddie. I don't know, Eddie. I think you might be my favorite so far. I love this. This was absolutely my pleasure. You're welcome back anytime.
Thank you. Yeah, well, we'll let the feedback come from the listeners. If they have questions or comments, they want us to talk about something again, I'd be more than happy to help. Like you said, God put us here for a reason. So the more we can do it, happy to do it together.
I appreciate that. I also appreciate everyone that's tuned into the show. A couple ways that you can support. You can head on over to Dr. Eddie's website and check out some of his offerings there. You can also head over to www.greatergrowthllc.com, purchase a t-shirt or a sweatshirt to support our faith-based clothing store. You can head over to amazon.com, purchase a copy of Back in My Day by Asia Wilson. Please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe us on other platforms. And then also, last but not least, check out the link tree in the caption and see what other services that we have to offer. We're now offering mentoring and also life skills. Thank you, and until next time.